Right, let us continue with our first panel here on stage one, here on day two of Procurement and Supply Chain Live London 2024. This is the Supply Chain Sustainability and Scope 3 panel, so let me introduce our guests for this very important subject. First of all, if I can welcome back John Hughes, Scope 3 Global Lead and UK Sustainable Supply Chain Lead at KPMG. Sebastian Blandino, Vice President, Europe Procurement, Ardagh Metal Packaging, and on my far side, Jonathan Chen, Business Leader, Supply Chain Services at Neo Tangent. A warm welcome to my panel, please. Okay, lots to get through, not much time, but we will go to questions at the end, both for our audience watching online and in the room too. Right, let's start with measurement, because that's the obvious place to start when it comes to Scope 3, because it is obviously about measurement. Sebastian, if I can start with you. When it comes to measuring Scope 3 emissions in your supply chain, how do you go about it? What are the best strategies? What's your advice on there?
Yeah, sure. So let me maybe start telling you a few words about our company. So we are Ardagh Metal Packaging. We're one of the largest producers of metal beverage cans in Europe. So what I do as a day job, I buy thousands and thousands of aluminium, thousands and thousands of tons of aluminium, and we make billions and billions of beverage cans. So Scope 3 is extremely important because we have all this footprint coming from the metal industry. How we measure it is actually pretty straightforward. First, we align with our suppliers what would be the actual emission factor. We really look at equivalent ton of CO2 per ton of metal. Then we rank them, and we actually project based on the supply mix what would be our actual emissions. That's one of the most important thing, not to only look at default values or emission factors, but look at the real input that will drive supply decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think when I look at clients across sectors, then you see a movement from measurement. Everyone starts out with spend-based, because it's the easiest thing to do. So you've got your spend on your suppliers, you come up with a set of emission factors, as Sebastian says, and actually that gives you a good start point. You can set targets from that, you can start to move from that. Where it becomes a difficulty that we see is then when you get on with initiatives with suppliers, if your spend hasn't changed, your carbon's going to look the same. And if your emission factors aren't becoming more granular, then it is going to look the same. So a lot of our clients then move towards a hybrid way of measuring. So they start to include things like product carbon footprinting via LCAs. Absolutely understanding the drivers of where the carbon comes into the products. And then a bunch of clients are moving to direct measurement from suppliers. So they will take data directly from suppliers rather than their estimate based on the emission factors. And a combination of those sort of three things and supplier-specific emission factors are really where people are moving. And that's how the baseline matures over time.
Yeah. One of the challenges I see, however, is to ensure that when you measure your emissions, you're comparing apple to apple.
Yeah.
And how do you ensure that suppliers will look at the same system boundaries, the same process definition, and if one tells you 2 and the other tells you 2.5, who's actually the best? You have to really understand what goes behind the numbers.
And that's a great point. So one of the biggest challenges we see, I spoke earlier today about technology and data being a challenge for everybody. Actually, a lot of our clients are saying, if I start collecting the data from suppliers, how do I know it's any good? Because the variability of understanding across the suppliers about what to measure, how to measure, is huge. And so, one of the big challenges is, how can I test that data and make sure it is good? And I spoke earlier about having emission factors within a sector or within a category, because that gives you a really good start point on what you can test that comes back from suppliers. And then you can apply assurance techniques that you would do on financial data and other data in your organization to test and prove that. But what you don't want to do is then start collecting some of that data from suppliers, have somebody pick a hole in it and call into question everything you've got. So you've got to be careful about that as well.
Yeah. So from our industry, the most challenging part of the measurement is because everyone using either don't have the system or have a different system, how to integrate the system in one platform. And as the data, sometimes the vendor is voluntary, so no data provided. So we have to train is how to calculate footprints and collect the data and validate, be more reliable. So this is the most challenge for the measurement from my point of view.
Absolutely. Well, we've started to touch on where I wanted to take the conversation next, and that's about working with those suppliers, the level of collaboration. And Jonathan Chen, if I could start with you on this one, what
Right.
steps have you taken to work with suppliers to reduce indirect greenhouse gas emissions? How does that collaboration work for you?
Right. So let me give you some quick brief about we are Nutangen. Nutangen is one global professional service organization. We not only provide like other GBS company focus on back office module, financial HR. We provide our middle office operation is entire supply chain end-to-end service from sourcing, procurement, master data management, or the process, warehouse, logistics, transportation, sustainability down to the after-sales service. We believe those middle office transformation and centralizing, which enable us to reach all the stakeholders in the entire supply chain. I mean, the most challenging supply chain innovation is a collaboration between all the stakeholders. So with the middle office concept, we really put all the stakeholders everyone put the skin in the game, joint value, continuous improvement through operation optimization, through technology innovation, through the material innovation as well, and the financial integration. So everyone, I mean, because any sustainability products, emission reduce is invest cost. That's the cost involved. So how we everyone in the chain to share the cost, share the resource, share the knowledge. So this is everyone is a joint efforts. So which helping us to reduce scope 3. For example, like a logistics part. So we help our customer to shift so the intermodal transportation. We encourage they are using more sea air shipment module, and we're helping them optimize their routing transportation, reduce delivery time, reduce the delivery times, and reduce fuel consumption, and using more energy in the warehouse. This is always selection helping them, but this is cost-wise. But everyone in the game should be share this cost in the short term, and this will be your market competitive in the future.
Yeah, great example. Sebastian, I've passed that on to you next about that collaboration, how you're working with those suppliers.
Yeah, sure. So I think we're very lucky in the sense that we have a very simple supply chain. Like most companies, 90% of our emissions are in scope 3, but 90% of my scope 3 are in metal. And we don't open new rolling mills every day in Europe. Let's say if we talk to 10, 15 supplier max, it's already a lot. So what the approach we took is really in-depth collaboration with our suppliers, starting with how do we measure and report, aligning on, as I was saying, what do we want to see in your numbers? What process steps do you consider in your emissions? When you calculate your carbon footprint per ton of product you ship to us, what does it mean? Is it really comparable? So that's step one. But then step 2 is to go into really in-depth value engineering, changing the specification, changing the content, changing the type of metal we get, because that's the only way to reduce your footprint. And maybe just making a segue to your keynote earlier, John, you said convincing the board is very important. Or we did not have to convince the board. The board at Arda was already convinced because sustainability is a key part of the value proposal of using metal beverage cans because it's infinitely recyclable. So it's really a big thing. Now, how do you make it tangible? That's the approaches we implemented with our suppliers, and I'm sure you will have questions on that in a few minutes, but really align the measurements, and then go deep into how do we invest together and how do we change the specification of what we buy.
And I think you're lucky because you've got a relatively simple supply chain with small amounts of suppliers that you can work with. What we see is clients across different sectors where they have really complex global supply chains of thousands or tens of thousands of suppliers, and then it becomes a much more of a complex challenge for them to get a hold of. Now, where they start is, let's do a pilot with the top suppliers. It's where everyone starts, right? And so they do that to understand, let's collect some data, let's work with those suppliers, let's collaborate, let's understand some of the issues. And then the challenge comes in two ways. One, scaling that across your supply base, your tier one supply base. And then the second challenge is the lack of transparency that people have on their supply chain below tier one. And so the carbon often sits below that tier one supplier further down the supply chain. And so people have to get an understanding of their supply chain to be able to collaborate. And you come up against the usual things that you would expect to see in that scenario. You know, your supplier may say, no, it's commercially confidential. I'm not telling you who my supplier is. You see that all the time. And it just becomes difficult to map certain supply chains and understand them. But that's where collaboration is absolutely key.
Absolutely. What I want to get on to now is, well, for anyone who's been in this room over the last couple of days, I'm a big fan of examples. I'm a big fan of case studies. I like to hear about these success stories because it colours in the issue. It puts the meat on the bones, if you like. John Hughes, I'll start with you, if I may, on this one. You know, you'll be working with a huge number of clients, partners on these kind of things. I'm sure you've seen many great success stories and strategies to reduce those Scope 3 emissions. Are there any that particularly excite you, the ones you look at and go, my goodness, that was a great idea. That's been a real success.
Well, I think you want to talk about pragmatic steps on this, right? There's no silver bullet.
I wish there was.
Here about how you're going to do that. So you look at some of the leaders out there, you know, the Schneider Electrics of this world, who, you know, are now engaged with their top 1,000 suppliers, which is actually, you know, the vast majority of their emissions. And they've scaled that. You know, they started out with 50, learned from it, and then have scaled. It's examples like that where people, when they're starting out with their organisation, it feels a bit scary. But actually, once you get going, the challenge for us as procurement and supply chain professionals is, I've got a bunch of suppliers, I need them to do something. We've had that challenge for years around different things, right? So it is about collaborating with the suppliers, upskilling people so they understand carbon, where it comes from, how it comes out, and then the technologies that we need to actually decarbonise the economy, they exist. You know, they're well understood now. They need to be scaled. This is the thing, and it's going to take us time to do that, but we need to help our suppliers across sectors do that.
Okay, let me make an example. I mean, one of our clients, they developed one dissolvable material. It's made by seaweed. It's very impressive. My first pop in my mind is how we use this, mix the bean curd to cook like the Japanese miso soup. So they come to us, say, hey, we have a huge development cost. And if we want to win this order, so this is a challenge. And I don't have a visibility for the cost of goods because nowadays, so the material like $100 pen, so 50% is cost. But the cost comes material manufacturing from logistic point of view. But they don't have a good visibility for the real cost indeed. So we come out like giving them our unique platform application cost of goods, so which able to link with different manufacturers, logistic part, warehousing, custom, able to collect all that real-time data, provide their management to make a decision how much real margin they are able to gain and put like in the investment for the material development. Of course, I mean, we loop like suppliers, where transportation service provider set the same common sustainable goal to cut down the cost. And in the short term, might be some cost increase, but the long term, this is competitive as a sustainable products. Long term, it will be game strategy.
That's a great example. Sebastian?
Yeah, I mean, let me start with a very old procurement joke. The best saving is the purchase you don't do, right? So I would say the best carbon saving is the carbon you don't emit. Now that maybe you did not travel to hear me say that, because that's a bit basic. But for us, the key is very simple. To reduce our carbon footprint, we need to use less metal. And how do you sustain your growth by using less raw material? You collaborate with suppliers in several ways. First will be use less metal in absolute terms. That's lightweighting. That's putting less metal for the same amount of product. That's reducing your scrap, your process waste. How do you ensure you have the right tooling, the right machines, that you get the same amount of products with less waste next to it? But then the second level, which is probably the most interesting, is how do you change the product you get as an input by moving from virgin to recycled? That's true for metal, that's true for paper, that's true for plastic, that's true for everything. Because if you use recycled in our industry, you consume 10 times less energy than if you use virgin. So, but to use recycled, you change the physical properties of your raw material. So you need to invent new alloys. You need to work with your suppliers because it's not just, hey, let's put more recycled into it. That doesn't work the same. We're shaping metal, so you have physical properties you still need to respect. You have more impurities, so you need more control in your quality process. And you will also have a different behavior of your tooling, so you also need to work with your tooling suppliers. So long story short, the success I would say I want to highlight is ability to really work with suppliers on the whole value chain, equipment suppliers, tooling suppliers, raw material suppliers, that it all works together in synergy for less input material at the end. But we don't want to sell less, we want to sell more. So less input for more output is the key to reduce Scope 3, right?
And I think another good example would be you look at embodied emissions in buildings, right? Majority of those are in concrete. So Heidelberg, one of the producers of cement and concrete out there, they've scaled their ultra-low carbon cement now. So, you know, going to be really available on the market next year in 2025. They've built up production capacity. They've really scaled carbon capture and storage across their facilities to actually bring this to market. That's what we need. These hard-to-abate sectors, we need the technologies to be scaled, and then people can access them. And the sort of levers that Sebastian spoke about then, more and more companies can use those as well.
And I think, John, your point on scalability is extremely important, because sometimes there's a bit of the hype cycle, a bit like AI. The most exciting technologies are not necessarily the most scalable.
Yeah.
And sometimes saying, yeah, just use more recycled content is not as exciting as just invent a new way to create your material. But is there scalability, or is it more show project that you can put a nice pics on your website?
Fully agree.
So alongside the material change, packing material change, so like a logistic party, we always relook those container capacity to eliminate those dead space, utilize the container to reduce the fuel consumption, and the result to the impact to the environment, Scope 3.
Okay, I'm going to move things on because we are starting to rapidly run out of time. And two key points I wanted to wrap up into one question really is about reporting, which is obviously absolutely critical in this discussion, and technology. How big a game changer is the advancement in technology when it comes to reporting in terms of the visibility you have through that supply chain? I'll start with you, John, on this one. When it comes to advising people on that kind of technology, because that's key. You've got to get the right solution in place. And if you've got the right solution in place, you've actually got to know how to use it. That's also critical. For you, how do you go about that challenge?
Yeah, so I think, look, we've got to report, and it helps us reporting externally, reporting into the organisation to understand what we're doing across that supply chain. So, you know, the challenge there can be different depending on the business. So, you know, does Sebastian need technology when he's got 10 to 15 suppliers who are really key? Probably not, right? But other organisations where it's a large number of suppliers, absolutely, they need technology. And they need it from a few angles. One is collecting the data and actually having that conversation with the supplier. Another angle of that is being able to report on it as well. You want to be able to report on it internally, understand the initiatives that you've got ongoing with those suppliers and where you're up to, and then eventually you want to be able to just feed that into the external reporting that happens. Because if you go and look at most organisations now who report on Scope 3, there's 15 different categories of Scope 3. Number 6 is business travel. That's what most people report as Scope 3 now, because it's easy for them to measure. You know, the amount of companies who actually report Category 1, the purchased goods and supply, is very small because of the challenge around this and the data and the ability to report. And so it's going to mature over time. As I spoke about earlier, the broad technology that we need to do it exists, but it needs to be built on, and you need sector specific solutions around that. And people need to have confidence in that technology. The thing you've got at the moment, I think, is a proliferation of providers out there. So you've got all the major platform providers who are saying, yes, we can do this, we can help you with it. You've got literally hundreds of best of breed solutions out there. Clients are telling us we're not sure which way to go, what consolidation is going to happen in the market, so we're going to wait. So they know, most clients know, they understand we're going to need technology, and that's not the right answer, right? And actually, if you've already invested in some technology, you should go with that because it will be able to help you do what you need, or pick one out there because the consolidation will happen in the market as it naturally does anyway. You've got to go with a solution. And so my advice to clients is, look, the reporting element of what you need is going to catch up. If you want to make progress with the suppliers, collecting the data, you're going to need that, and you're going to need technology around it now.
That's fascinating insight. Sebastian, I'll come to you on that next, because John did sort of refer to, I guess you've got a unique challenge in the fact that your supply chain is relatively simple, which I think is a bit different to a lot of people. So you have that blessing. But so how do you use technology when it comes to reporting?
No, I think, John, you're right. We see technology as an enabler, and we use some of it. Now, depends technology for what. If it's to gather thousands of reports from thousands of suppliers, I don't need it. If it's technology to help me ensure that we are looking at apple to apple quality numbers, then yes, I need it. And we have there's an aspect linked to it that we don't discuss directly. Technology linked to regulatory compliance. Mm-hmm. With CBAM, there's a huge reporting requirement that we actually face. Because €150 of import on steel or aluminium, you need to fill a CBAM declaration. That's thousands and thousands of declarations. So that's an aspect where technology could be of great help. Yeah. Purely, let's say, broader carbon reporting depends.
And Jonathan Chen, if we bring you in, technology is very much your
yes,
area of expertise.
I mean, technology is a cool factor for the process service organization. So we are aim to build those green supply chains with proactive, productive, and preventive. This is all reliant on real data make the final decision. So technology, we will inbound this definitely, but it requires deep domain to drive in those innovation for the AI part, for the digital part, knowledge part. So yes, we do have a challenge. I mean, those data, we bring our sustainable system called transparency for supply chain. So which aim we are able to track all the raw material from original from farmer, from spinner, from dyeing, what is the usage, what's the cost be. So because consumer asking for this expectation, right? Because the ethic responsibility, they will let you know where this material come from, whether those material, involve like a labor force or child labor. So we have to provide those visibility, those technology inside on and off, and also the carbon footprint in scope 3. So we have to educate our vendor how they calculate and put the system. Those technology, I know in the market there are a lot of different service providers, but which one is best? With the data, how you use it, how the data security. So this is the most challenging part we need to think through.
Absolutely. I still want to get on to questions about some future trends and supplier selection, but I'm also conscious I do not have a monopoly on questions. So what I would like to do is go to the room to see if there is any immediate questions, and there are. Can I get this round?
Yeah, thank you. John Buckhoe from Eco Energetica. We do truck charging for heavy goods vehicles. I suppose my question's not about that. It's about the presentation of data. How important is it to present to your executive vice president and C-suite Scope 3 emissions as a financial risk model?
Yeah, so I think it's increasingly becoming more and more important. So if you don't put what carbon is into a financial sense and what the impact could be on the business if you don't meet your commitments, then it doesn't necessarily talk the language of some of the C-suite, and especially if you're speaking to a CFO, for example, then you absolutely need it. And we're seeing more and more of our clients say, okay, we understand where we are from a carbon point of view. We think we've got a plan to deal with it. We need to understand what the impacts could be here from a financial perspective and turn it into that financial perspective. So for us, it's definitely a trend that we're seeing more and more. Presents a challenge right now because people don't necessarily understand their scope 3 well enough. But yeah, it's definitely a trend.
I would say it's a very good question, but it depends on your industry as well. If you're in an industry under ETS or CBAM scope, every ton of carbon you generate will be a ton of carbon you need to purchase credit for. So there's a very, very direct link between what you get in your scope 3 and how much you will have to pass through to your customers. And that's where I think you were mentioning competitive advantage.
Yep.
If two players sell the same commodity, one has a high carbon content, one has a low carbon content, the price is not the same at the end. So it's
I mean, in our data, so sustainability and scope 3 is not nice to have, it's the must to have. I mean, based on the research, 64% of consumer, they will think through this sustainability, whether it's products, right, when they make a purchase decision. I mean, this is when you consider sustainable products, it's really bring like the customer loyalty. So it's have to consider. And be frank speaking, the regulator will be more strictly. You will be facing the huge penalty and the fine in the future if you have no any change, I mean.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from the room? Yes, we do. It's quite nice getting to sit out here for a moment. I've not done that today yet.
Yeah, hello. Alex, working for Siemens. I want to pick your brains quickly. I hear, and I had, John, the opportunity to hear your morning speech, is I hear a lot of transparency, data, technology. And I wonder, at which point do we start to create the portfolio for the future? So if I recap procurement, I was like, we started with negotiation, then we came to design to cost. You guys maybe remember that. Then we started with design to value and cost and value engineering. And I would like to see something that goes in the direction of design to sustainability. Because a lot of the things that I hear is, hey, transparency is going to fix the problem. And I would disagree, because I don't have the portfolio for the future. So from your point of view, what will be the role of addressing organizations like R&D and engineering from our point of view to ensure that this is going to happen?
So, yeah, if I start off, I fully agree. Transparency, and when I spoke about it, is an enabler. It is not the thing that is going to get you to actually reduce your carbon, right? It's the levers you need to pull on decarbonisation, whether that's looking at re-engineering the product, redesigning the product, new materials that you need. It's those things that are actually going to drive where you need to go. And there was a good example yesterday where Diageo, the beverage maker, actually came out with a paper-based package for Johnny Walker whiskey, right? That they've scaled with, I think it's with PA Consulting and Pullpack. So, you know, those examples of innovation and driving them through the supply chain are really what's necessary. What I spoke about were definitely the enablers. So you're going to have to understand, we're going to have to report at the end of the day. So we've got to understand where it is in our supply chain, and we've got to educate people about what they need to do. But I think the major education is around decarbonisation levers. What can you do to reduce the carbon?
And I would say I feel lucky in the aluminium industry that we are part of all this regulatory pressure of phase 1. But believe me, there will be phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Carbon price initiatives are here to stay. Carbon price will probably go up, and scope of coverage will also be increased. There was an interesting report from the World Bank that says Europe is roughly 40% of emission today in scope at roughly 80 euro. What if it goes to 70% of emission at 150 euros? So I think when you talk to your engineering team, to your R&D, there's a way to model, you know, what's next. Maybe it's not for today, but what if your industry gets in scope of the next ETS or CBAM waves? You have a very direct financial impact linked to it. So it's not only do we believe it's good, yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's not savings or sustainability. Mm-hmm. For more and more industries, it will be sustainability or no savings, or actually cost increase.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, for sustainable product, there's no saying where to start. Actually, this involves a lot of engaged education for all the stakeholders, and from material innovation, from the education and all the process change. I mean, this is a long-term investment. So you want to consider this a long-term strategy and convince your board meeting to invest. But in the end, you will gain the result. in the couple of years later.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your questions. We will look to wrap things up so we can go to our first networking break of the day. As I always say, if you keep people from their coffee, it never ends well. So a warm round of applause and thank you for John Hughes from KPMG, Sebastian Blandino from Metal Packaging, and Jonathan Chen from Neo Tangent. Thank you very much indeed.